finished university, after about a year, me and a bunch of friends decided to move to Silicon Valley. Is my English okay? The first company we started was something called LiveRail. This was in sort of 2007, 2008, when web video advertising was a big deal. And we were one of the first web video advertising platforms. That was actually the beginning of my entrepreneurial career. I actually started a company in university as well, something more focused on the textiles business, let's say. Anyways, we moved to Silicon Valley in 2008 around the time of the crisis, and it was really hard to raise money. We did manage to find one venture capitalist, and since then, I stayed with the company for about 3 or 4 years. Eventually, in 2014, they exited to Facebook for $500 million. But subsequent to my involvement in LiveRail, I then set up another company, something called Siasto, which is how I actually met you, nobody was seen. That was when I did Y Combinator. So when I did Y Combinator in 2010, 2011, it was a little different from how it is now. It was still the same people, were still involved. It was still an extremely valuable experience. The network itself is probably what I would say is the most valuable aspect. And perhaps, as I told earlier as well, it's what probably also lacks a little bit here. And so for me, that was something that was very interesting as a kind of more sort of an accelerator mentality. So I think a lot of the things that we've done to meet some of the great investors in Silicon Valley. Then they helped me with fundraising, with some legal stuff, and that's the mindset that exists in Silicon Valley to work with people that early in the life cycle of their business. So that for me was a very useful aspect to that.
So this was your second startup that went...
We were actually the first single-page application where you could add tasks, communicate, and share. So in 2010, when we did it, that was still fairly early in that kind of JavaScript.
So it's a tool management for companies to help them manage.
Small teams.
And so who did?
And that was when it was by chance. So the first investor, actually, in my last company that did work was actually who I'm working with now. So it's always, it's very interesting getting to finally meet a lot of different ideas, because when you're doing a startup on your own, you focus on one thing, day in, day out, 18 hours a day. And it's nice to actually meet a lot of very intelligent people who are working on different things. So I found it very inspiring. I find it very inspiring.
So your new fund is called Beast Ventures.
That's right.
And it's based in the UK.
Yeah. So pretty much up until my involvement, we've actually been investing globally. So we've invested in Silicon Valley, in the UK as well, and in Israel. But now, in the new year, we're going to refocus a little bit more just in Europe. Because we discovered, and a lot of people told us this, but we didn't believe it, it's very difficult to run a global fund. And it is, because you're on the plane a lot, and you tend to not meet people at the right stage. So what often happens is, particularly in Silicon Valley, we found, even though we got into some great deals, people aren't coming to us first, right? It's like, oh, a friend of ours invested, and so why don't you guys get involved as well? So I think that's been an interesting learning, and that's why now we're going to focus on Europe.
So can you tell us a bit more about how you invest? What your investment thesis?
Sure. Yeah, so up until recently, our investment thesis is always business to business. So we like businesses that are selling other businesses effectively. More recently, and this is very much been led by colleagues we've had recently, we prefer companies that are much more deeply technical. So something that is, a lot of people use words like AI and machine learning too frequently, but we do like companies that have some orientation towards that kind of technology. So actually the company we just exited to Spotify, that was exactly the area they're working in. So in kind of AI machine learning around sound and voice.
How about the ticket size?
So we've invested up to 350k. We're early stage, sorry, I should have answered your question already. We're early stage, so seed and pre-seed is where we invest. Because we feel we can add most value to an entrepreneur, we can help them. So I'm obviously more operational. One of my partners is has been a very active angel investor, so he's done over 20 investments. And the other guy was previously a VC as well in a different fund.
Can you maybe give us some examples of startups you invested in that are doing well?
Yeah, sure. So I think I told you about one earlier. So Oculus, the headset. So one of my partners, he invested in Oculus. He was one of the early investors in Oculus. There's something also that I saw just raised, well, I know it's just raised a B round led by Google Ventures called Clear Labs. An example of a company where we've invested in recently is Sonalytics, the one I was just talking about. So they use sort of recognition of sound so a little bit like Shazam, if anyone's familiar with Shazam, it's a bit like Shazam but on steroids. If the parallel works.
Okay, awesome, thank you. So since you're investing in Europe, and get to meet a lot of startups and see how is the deal flow, can you tell us a bit more about this ecosystem and what you've noticed? What are the opportunities and challenges?
So I'll start with the challenges and then I'll talk about the optimistic part. A big challenge in the UK right now is obviously Brexit. So we're facing something of a sea change in the way Europe works. And even for example, if you just talk about venture capital in Europe, so we don't raise from institutions. We raise from mostly high net worth individuals, and well, we'll see next year. But so the European Investment Fund is a very big investment fund. That's a European bank, effectively, and 1/3 of all venture in Britain comes from the European bank, basically. So that's going to be a huge change if that comes out for startups. So what we're starting to see also is people now are more concerned about recruiting. So before, a lot of British startups would hire people from Poland very easily. Now there's more of a question, well, if I bring them now, is it going to be okay in a year? Is it going to be okay in 2 years? So that's become a big challenge. On the flip side, though, what I'm very optimistic about is research and development in Europe is on par with the best you'll see in the United States. And so we typically will meet extremely technical, very research-driven companies that have not really been commercially exposed yet in a lot of Europe. Basically outside of London, I'd say.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So, coming back to your entrepreneurial journey, what would be the advice that you can share with entrepreneurs here? And what are the most important things you learned through YC and through your experience?
Okay, so first question was, what can I tell entrepreneurs from my experience? I guess don't quit too soon, because you never know what's going to happen. So the number of people I've seen, and actually, so I said we used to invest in Israel. We're not doing it any longer because the funds have changed. But in Israel, the community is so tight of entrepreneurs that everyone flips idea the whole time, because it's like, oh, this is a more exciting idea. I'm going to do this. Whereas generally, tenacity is one thing that I've seen has driven many entrepreneurs much further than they would believe. So I think that's a big thing. I think at YC they call it being formidable, which is a very nice way of saying finding the resourcefulness in yourself to always create the solution. I think that was something that I learned from YC, definitely.
So, being an investor today, do you have different kind of advice to give to entrepreneurs while approaching these investors and trying to respond?
Yeah, I think try and have a clear pitch, if possible. Please don't make it too confusing. I guess don't be scared to take advice. I think that there's actually a lot of people who have good advice, particularly in markets that are known. People actually, if you're doing something in e-commerce, there's so many people who have done e-commerce before. Go and find someone who's an expert in the area. Who will generally be able to tell you a lot of what you should be doing. Although we don't do e-commerce, so that's not an area I'm that interested in. But I suppose, what was your question?
Advice as an investor?
Advice as an investor, don't try and play games with investors, it never works. just stop doing that, because that's really tedious.
Should an entrepreneur go and try to raise money from day one, or should he wait until he has some traction and some interesting thing to show?
I mean, definitely try and wait as long as possible. If you don't even, in fact, as an entrepreneur, if you never need to raise money, don't raise money, because the cap table is your own, right? You know, your destiny is your own. But if you're raising, you know, because you've got a VC business and you believe that that's what you should do, then yeah, I believe that there's a certain point at which it makes sense to raise capital. You know, don't raise it too soon because you'll work on the company, and make sure you're working with people who understand what your business is, because it's going to last 7, 10 years. It's not just going to be a quick flip 1 year, 2 years.
So now that you have seen different startup scenes and ecosystems around the world, in the US, in Europe, in Israel, what do you think is key to any ecosystem to succeed and be able to produce successful startups? What can we learn from that here in Morocco?
So the gentleman actually talking earlier, I think one of them made a very good point, which is that you need to have examples of companies that are, you know, or entrepreneurs, I'd say, who have done well. And you know, I'm not that familiar with the Moroccan startup scene, but you know, if there are people like that here who you can interact with, that's extremely useful. I personally found that. I believe that that's the case everywhere else. I also believe that at the earliest stage, angel investors can be very, very important, because having people, again, who have been there, who have done it, but who are willing to put money behind something makes a huge difference. So yes, having had big exits can often help. So,
how about the market? Can you give us some advice, some tips about that? The market size. We spoke about Israel.
Oh, I see, yes, okay. So one thing that we noticed a lot in Israel and in the Nordics, so obviously the Nordic countries are also, you know, it's a very small domestic market, and yet, you know, Skype, transfer-wise, they've all come from Nordic countries. And I think that having a global mindset from from day one can make a big difference. In Israel, it's baked into the DNA, right? It's like, no, we're doing this because we're going to sell straight to the States, or the first customers aren't necessarily the local market. I think that can help a lot, particularly, as you talk about looking at Africa as well.
Okay, so think big, think global, or at least regional from day one, and don't just focus on one small market like Morocco. This is a message for you entrepreneurs.
I think you can focus on the Moroccan market if you want, but maybe it's just not going to be a VC business, right?
Right. Awesome. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
So maybe we can open up to questions. I know maybe you have a lot of things to ask.
Yeah, my question is about the time that you spent in white nature. We all know that very famous podcast of all drama that don't scale. Yeah. My question is, how do they do to make you do things that don't scale, and how did you feel at that time doing things that don't scale? Was it really helping you that time?
I think it's also a mentality, right? It's more about you're willing to do things that are hard. A lot of software developers would just be like, well, I'll just go and build a better thing, and then that'll solve the problem. Whereas maybe the hardest thing to do for him is actually to just go talk to a customer or a potential customer and be like, well, do you need this? Is this going to help you do what solution I hope it will provide you? And then they might be like, no, it doesn't help me at all. And in a way, that's what I believe, in my opinion, that's a lot about doing the unscalable things. Because it's not scalable for you as an individual to go speak to 10,000 people, right? But you maybe can speak to 100 or 200, and so that's my take on that.
So could you maybe just explain what is do things that don't scale? What's this mindset? What is this methodology of development?
I can't remember the example Paul Graham gave, but let's say. Think about like an e-commerce business, right? We're a restaurant delivery business. At the beginning, as a founder, I could say, okay, I'm going to do all the deliveries, right? I'm going to get this pizza shop, and I'm going to take orders from people through the app, and I'm going to do all the deliveries. That's pretty unscalable, because you get about 10 orders and you're done. That's it, right? So I would say that's an example.
Okay. So this is very important as well for entrepreneurs here, to really have this mindset of starting doing things just like handmade, things that don't start and build this big platform from day one, but just create a Facebook page maybe or anything that can help you test your product and your concept. So this is like the mindset behind do things that don't scale. Any other questions? Anything you want to learn? We have an amazing entrepreneur here, successful, that sold 2 startups and is now an investor, went to the most famous accelerator and seed fund. Yes, please.
How do you define success?
Good question. I think that depends on the individual. Do you mean from a VC perspective, or do you mean just as an individual? How do I personally define success? I think everyone has their own criteria for success. So for some people it might just, well, not just, it might be having a home and, raising their kids and that kind of stuff. Whereas for some other people, they want to do something that's going to create wealth and lots of jobs. So it's a bit nebulous, to be honest.
There was another question there.
I would just like to have your opinion regarding most of Moroccan startups' missions here in Morocco, because actually, when you said that we need to think global from the start and look for ideas that are scalable, most of young Moroccan startups here are trying to solve local or regional issues, because we do not have the luxury to think about solutions to improve the way a customer looks for goods online or something like that. We still have people who are actually struggling with just having the equivalent of $10 per day. So we need to actually work on that before looking for more innovative solutions in other fields. And it kind of blocks us just in the local market and regional market. So in that case, if the solution is not that scalable globally, does it still make it like that startup? Is this startup interesting for investors, for example, like your company or other global funds, even if it's solving only regional issues or local issues?
Well, I think a good example of a company that has solved problems for people at that income bracket is BlaBlaCar, the car sharing, which is equivalent to, I guess, the white taxis here, right? So that's something that has solved a somewhat local problem, but then it's being globalized. I think it's done very, very well in India, for example. I think there's a large part of the world that also still fits within what you're talking about. And so if you're using Morocco as a test bed, and then your plan is to expand into those other countries, then that can make a lot of sense. If you're saying to me, no, we're building this extremely high-end software solution that then we're hoping to sell to the US, you're probably better off just going to the US, right? Starting here might be a bit more tricky in terms of testing and so on. But if your idea is to expand into a market which is equivalent income bracket, I think it can be very interesting. Africa's a big place, right? So there's a huge number of potential markets there.
Thank you. Any other questions you want to ask? Well, if not, I have one for you. So we spoke about that, but how important is seed investment, pre-seed and seed investment for startups compared to advice and mentorship?
I think that's a very good point, and yeah, I'm sure we could have a very long conversation about it. I think advice is great, right? And if you don't know what you're doing, it's number one. But ultimately, at some point, for someone to make the plunge of doing a startup, they need to feel comfortable enough that this is something that an investor values and that they have the potential to take it somewhere. I think it makes a huge difference, right? I think in combination is the best, right? If something that we talk about a lot in Silicon Valley is inverted commas dumb money. It can be, I'm sure it can be great to, have $100,000 from some guy you're never going to see again, and the idea is that you're going to be able to create with that. But ultimately, if you had less money, but from someone who actually knew your market and had a lot of experience, it probably pays off much, much longer. Because as I was saying before, you're going to work with an investor for the life cycle of your company, and that's going to be maybe 7, 8 years, so it's a big part of your life. So why not work with people you want to work with, not just money?
Okay, so what you're saying is for entrepreneurs, take smart capital. Don't take money just to take money. And don't take it when you don't need it, of course.
I actually have a funny example about that. So a friend of mine raised some money in Silicon Valley a few years ago. And he was a little bit, unfortunately, on that spectrum of just raise money from whoever's going to give it to you. And then 3 or 4 years later, the guy wrote me and said, well, you know, you've done well, I now expect my money back. So, you know, even just the concept of it being an equity investment and for a long-term perspective was totally, you know, foreign to him. And I've also heard about other stories where people have, you know, refused to sign on the next round of funding because they didn't like the deal or something like that. And so it's, yeah. So
the mindset of the investor is very important as well. And this is something we need to change here in Morocco, because in our emerging ecosystems we have a lot of wealthy people with a lot of money, but unfortunately, as they haven't seen success stories yet coming from the startup world, they don't really understand this new business. So they're still investing in real estate. And as your investment space, so in what we are talking about, I can't tell you more right now, so it's a bit of a teaser, but please join us in January to know more about that, and finger crossed for something very special for the ecosystem. Thank you. Thank you so much, Nic.